when I was trying to introduce myself to everybody, they were like, but wait, are you on or off campus? And I kind of am one of those people, I was afraid if I left Brattleboro, I would never come back. And never do my capstone. I would be one of those 5-year students who at the very last minute was in a rush, you know. I'd be one of those 1064, 65s you guys are seeing in the library every day who are frantically trying to remember what they did 5 years ago and write a paper about it. So I didn't want to do that. So I decided to stay here and kind of refine some of my skills in monitoring and evaluation, which is the kind of the niche in development management that I chose to work in. So before I came here and did monitoring and evaluation with the Graduate Institute, I worked with Peace Corps in Belize, and I with the program did M&E for them. And then I also, as a consultant with organizations in Belize outside of Peace Corps worked and did M&E work. So most of my experience is in international development, monitoring, evaluation, but before that I was a teacher, and teachers by nature do a lot of assessment. We are taught constantly how to assess and evaluate students and programs, and so I kind of came back here to the Graduate Institute where in a much more structured environment I got to kind of practice some of these skills. So today I'm just going to talk to you guys about these things. Kind of what monitoring and evaluation is, the difference between monitoring and evaluation. That's really important when you're writing a proposal, that you differentiate between the two. How you kind of tie monitoring and evaluation into your entire project proposal, the different types of M&E, how it relates to your project cycle, and how you actually write out a plan. And then I'll talk to you guys about how I do it here. So that it kind of as an example or as a case study. So this is a lot of stuff on one slide, but I just wanted to kind of differentiate between the two. So we'll start with evaluation, because that's kind of what most people are the most interested in when they think about evaluation. Did this project have an impact? That's what they want to know. Did it have the effect that we wanted? Did the people who got trained, did they actually know what we wanted them to know? So that's the evaluation. So the most common definition is the collection and analysis of information to assess the impact of the organization's work. A really commonly accepted one is from the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development. All these acronyms get kind of meshed together, but they have one that a lot of people subscribe to, and it's the process of determining the worth, significance of an activity, policy, or program. So they say you can evaluate any of those things. And for you all, you're talking about programs and projects. So that's kind of evaluation. When we talk about evaluation, you'll hear two different types of evaluation a lot: formative and summative. So how many of you have ever been teachers? So maybe you've heard all the time talking about formative assessment and summative assessment. If you think about it in terms of a classroom, which I'm confident that we've all experienced that before since we're all in the classroom right now, formative assessment would be the midterm, or the formative evaluation. That would be when your professor says, okay, it's 6 weeks into the class, I want to test how much knowledge they have acquired until this point. And they do it, they look at the grades, they say, okay, I see that we're a little weak here, we're pretty good here, here's what I'm going to do to kind of make up for anything that I missed, and then they keep teaching. And then the summative assessment is when they give a final exam over everything in the class, including what they originally gave you in midterm. So that's the difference between formative and summative. I like to think of formative as like, it's the stuff that's forming what you're hoping is going to end up being, what you want in totality. So all of this is completely different than monitoring. And monitoring is often just completely left to the wayside. Monitoring is when you're tracking the implementation of the project. So for that, that's just tracking the cost, the personnel, the time, your resources. You're tracking how you're using your inputs. You're tracking that you're getting the right amount of outputs. So those are the two things you're tracking. And we'll talk more about this, but just kind of an overview. So in evaluation, you're actually making a judgment. You're actually making an assessment. And then in monitoring, you're just tracking. There's not enough data to actually make an assessment with monitoring. Okay, any questions about that? All right, so we'll talk more with more examples. So you're probably like, okay, we're doing something exciting. We're writing a project proposal for, I don't know, what kind of plans are you guys working with here? What's your group writing a project about?
Human-mediated therapy.
Okay. What's another group doing?
Farm, S.I.T. Farm, Sustainable Agriculture Initiative.
Okay, and then what are you all? I guess you guys, are you all a group too? What do you all do? The farm? Okay, so 2 groups are doing the farm? Or
I think you've gone to project.
Okay, so you guys are all saying, we're really excited about the implementation. You guys are the people that want to get in there, and you want to work on the farm, you want to do the therapy, you want to do these things. And that's really good, because we need those people who actually want to work with people and help them. We don't all need people like me who are more about the backside. We actually need people who want to work on the farm, right? So, and that's exciting to write a project about those things. But it's really important when you're writing your proposal to include monitoring and evaluation for these reasons. You can say, we want to train teachers how to teach kids how to read. That is what we want to do. And I've done a lot of that in my life, training teachers. But I've been doing that for years, and I have never one single time stopped to check to make sure any of those teachers know how to teach, then I don't know that I've been successful. And what is the point of continuing to do it unless I know? So that is the main purpose of evaluation. Also, when you do monitoring and evaluation, you improve the management style. So for instance, in the farm, if you find out you're wasting a lot of money while you're doing the monitoring on fuel, and if you did all the things that you needed to do in the beginning of the day with the tractor, you would cut down on fuel costs. Or if you use only one type of fuel, if you guys want all the diesel and away from gasoline, that's the kind of stuff that you make, decisions you make that are informed by strategic monitoring. And it helps your management. Generating and sharing new knowledge. That's something that everyone's like, oh, okay, well, everything does that. So when you're doing evaluation, you may find out things that you weren't expecting. Like sometimes you have an impact that you weren't expecting. So for instance, you may think that by teaching women in Guatemala basic household budgeting, all you're teaching them how to do is how to spend their money. But in fact, you'll find that when you go 5 years later and you interview those women, these women may be more successful than other women in their community, and you'll find that you have empowered these women. And that will be an impact that you were not expecting. So then you can start doing gender studies about knowledge that you were expecting, because you have had an unexpected result from your work. And so that's always really exciting. Capacity building, this is the part, the component that I'm the most interested in. A lot of times evaluators are Westerners. They get paid a lot of money by funders to go to other countries and to show up at your farm project and tell you how successful or how unsuccessful you've been. And it's very scary. And that's how a lot of evaluation is presented. I'm the funder, and I want to know if you're spending my money correctly. And that isn't what it should be about. It should be about generating knowledge, and it should be about capacity building. So the farm workers should learn from these evaluators how to do it themselves, so that they can continuously evaluate themselves, and the next time they want to take this farm project and they want to take it to the next community college, they're going to have a better project because they have been able to do it for themselves. And it shouldn't just be about how you spend someone else's money. It should be about how to increase impact and effectiveness. So that's kind of a philosophical thing. So this is one of the things. It's kind of our shtick. And then motivating stakeholders. I'm at S.I.T, so I'm really into participatory approaches. So when I was in the field, we did a very, very participatory style of evaluation. In fact, I'm really unfamiliar with the type of evaluation where it's just 3 people come into a country and they're like, okay, we're here for 3 weeks, we're going to find out what you guys did. I'm much more familiar with the kind where you take stakeholders from each group, you get together, you plan, you decide at the beginning of the project how you're going to evaluate it 5 years later at the end of the project. That's kind of the stuff that I've been more familiar with. So. And then ensuring accountability. That is our least favorite part of it, but it's probably the most important part. And that is why it's in the proposal. Because if you're proposing this to somebody to ask for money or ask for permission, this is the part they're going to want to know. Especially the people you're asking for money. This is the thing they're going to want. Well, how are you going to know? So what? You know what you want to do, but how are we going to be sure you did it with a lot of money? And this is kind of build on that. These are the 2 different things. You'll hear this a lot. Evaluation provides information about rationale or justification and a clear theory of change. So you're like, well, we know if we know that if we build latrines, the water situation will improve because we'll have all of our waste contained. Or we know if we build a water system, people will drink clean water, but you don't actually know that. You don't actually know that is true. So one organization that is a good example of this in my mind is Teach for America. Does everyone know what Teach for America is? Teach for America is an American organization, and their mission is to eradicate educational inequity. And I'm not bragging on Teach for America. I just want to go ahead and say I'm not naysaying on Teach for America. My sister is actually a Teach for America volunteer. But, so we argue about this a lot when we're at dinner. But, so, Teach for America wants to eradicate educational inequity in the United States places. So they work on Native American reservations, they work in under-resourced communities in rural South and in urban communities that are considered under-resourced. And they say that the reason they're under-resourced is because they don't have trained teachers. And if they had good teachers, then it wouldn't matter, the students would do better. And so there's a teacher shortage in the country. And so what they've done is they've gone across the United States and they've heavily recruited the top percentage of all students. And they're very, very selective of who they select. And they take the top graduates from the United States, people who are on track to be lawyers and doctors and all these fancy people, and they say, okay, go and teach in this public school in the Atlantic-Fulton County system, which is where I'm from, and teach there, and you will find that by having this 2-year experience of being a teacher there, you will like help the community because they'll have a trained teacher. And then you will, when you go on to be the lawyer or the doctor that you want it to be, you'll always have that experience in your mind, and you'll be more civically minded towards your community. That's the philosophy. But the problem is, that's their theory of change, is they're going to supply teachers to eradicate educational inequity. So does anyone see the problem with taking people who weren't on track to be teachers for 2 years?
How can you say they're trained?
Right. They went. My sister got a degree in international affairs at the Georgia Tech, an engineering school, and now she teaches earth science in Brooklyn. And she is not going to teach earth science next year. I can tell you that right now. She does not like it. She does not like it at all. It's hard. She did not go to teacher education school, so she does not have classroom management techniques. And it's not the students; it's her. Like, it's not that her students are so bad. Like, we went to a high school that's just like the one she teaches in. Is that she doesn't know how to manage a classroom because she is not a trained teacher. And she knows, and she and all of the colleagues that she's going to Teach for America with, they are out of there after they do their 2 years of service. It's on their resume. They have done what they're going to do. She is going to law school. Like, that is that. So while their mission is admirable, and I really think their mission is the Wendy Kopp, the person who started Teach for America, is amazing. She started it when she was in her 20s. She's an inspiration, but the theory of change is actually a little bit problematic because I'm not sure that educational inequity is eradicated by putting a Band-Aid on a teacher shortage problem. So that's kind of the thing. That's one of the things that we do. That's what the strategic part of evaluation can do. So it's kind of disheartening at the end of your project. Someone's like, oh, good try, but actually you haven't solved the problem. You've just kind of been Band-Aid the whole time. Other thing is operations. This is really straightforward. Effectiveness and efficiency, stakeholder satisfaction. Those are all from surveys. How you spent your money. Did you spend your money the most efficiently? Let's say we're both running an HIV/AIDS education outreach project. I spend $5 million. I train 5 people. You spend $2 million. You train 3,000. That happens, and that's what we learn about. And then the last thing is alternative best practices and lessons learned. So when you make projects, you look at projects like the ones you're interested in, and you oftentimes will mimic them. So any questions about the types of information we can learn? Okay. These are the 5 big ones. I just kind of went over them, but oftentimes if you're an evaluator, they'll come in, like when I got hired here, they said, AnnaLiza, we want you to do an effectiveness. Like they said, we want you to do an effectiveness evaluation. They'll say, we want you to do an efficiency evaluation. We want you to do an impact evaluation. Sometimes they'll say, we want you to do all 5. It just depends. Like, they will hire you. The World Bank may say, okay, we want you to go in and we want you to do impact and sustainability, and that's it. Like, that's all we're curious about. We want to know, did it have the impact we desired, and it's sustainable to keep doing this work in the Sudan? Like, that's what they want to know. They don't care if it's efficient. They don't care if it's intermediate effective. They want to know. And so these are the ways we break it up, and there are different strategies for all of them. Okay, so that's kind of...
You recall when you did your needs assessment that you ran into some of the similar literature associated with this, And then also sort of strategies. How are you going to calculate what strategy you're going to do? The force field, a review of resources, and then there was a third one that was called EC, remember, evaluation criteria. Even on the front end of all this should be, and these are the very categories that started showing up as you were thinking about your strategy.
Right.
And planning.
So it's good in the beginning of a project that you're saying to know which one you're going to want to do. In the beginning, you should actually you should maybe try to do all of them. But it's really in the end when they say, well, we don't have enough data to do an impact survey, we can maybe do an efficiency survey. So that's, okay. So here's something that you have to know a lot about to be successful in planning a monitoring and evaluation plan, and it's the hierarchy, which I think you guys have talked about. I think you all talked about it in class. With the project plan. So that's your goal, your purpose, your output, and your activities. And I wanted to give you this handout. It came from a CARE packet. It came from a CARE workbook because it just to emphasize that this is language that is used really interchangeably, and it's often very, very confusing. So particularly on this page, I think it's your first page, you see that CARE uses a certain type of language. And then under that, all of these other development organizations use completely different language for the same exact thing. They mean the same exact thing, but they use completely different language. I mean, and the problem is, it's not completely different. It's not like they say apples, oranges, pineapples. It's like they use the same 3 words completely differently, and that's what's so confusing. So Kara has gone through and made this diagram that shows you all the different ways. And the reason why I'm showing you this is because mostly they've only put this for funders. They've only really put giant funding agencies over here on the vertical. So it tells you if you're applying for USAID money and you have a proposal, you do not need to be using, S.I.T, Canadian language. You want to be using American language. If you're applying for, for funding from Denmark, use Denmark's language. That's the point of this entire thing. So, for instance, last year I took development management with Samdani Fakir, a man who'd worked at BRAC for a really long time. And we learned the classical logic framework that's on here on one of these pages. And then people who took it with Jim Levinson learned more of the CARE, the USAID, because that's where his background was. So I think they give you this, these to kind of give you a reference, and then they kind of give you the breakdown. So that this is a useful tool. I use it all the time when I'm trying to figure out what different people are saying. So when you're doing monitoring, when you're writing your monitoring plan, this is what you're monitoring. You're only monitoring your inputs, your activities, and your outputs. Monitoring always covers the bottom part. That's called the first level of evaluation or assessment. You're actually, like I said, tracking your inputs. You're tracking your outputs to see if you did the activities that you had planned on doing in your project. So if you look at this guy with the funny little men on it, when you do monitoring, you monitor these 3 boxes. And you do that through the course of the entire project. And then when you evaluate, you only evaluate the last 2. So this is kind of monitoring, and then the last 2 are evaluation. So that's kind of how we divide them up. And let me give you an example of why you have to do both. So I was working in Belize for a completely different consultant agency doing monitoring and evaluation. And a rural project came in 3 years after they were done with their project. Their project had been done for years. And they said, we went around the most rural part of Belize, and we built 2 latrines in some communities that had latrines and water systems in communities that had really, really, really big problems and incidences with diarrhea-related illnesses. And so they said, we wanted them to be drinking clean water and containing their waste, and that was their whole theory of change. So they went in and they didn't do any training. They just built these latrines and water systems, and the community helped, and the community was into it, and the community understood that this was a very helpful initiative. All of the communities. And they said, so we know that you all have been working and living here for a long time, and you have really good rapport with the community. Will you help us do our evaluation? And come in. And they had monitored all of this stuff. So they had all these maps that were really detailed, and they had the exact location where they planned on building the latrine. They had the exact location where they actually built the latrine. They had the community. They had all the communities mapped out. It was the most detailed map I'd ever seen of this area of Belize, because mostly rural indigenous communities. And they had, so I was like, well, yeah, this will be really easy. I'll just go out there and see if the latrines are there and see if people are pooping in them. Like, that's what I'm going to do. Like, I'm going to go out and check latrines and water systems. So I go out there, and the first place we go, because we're doing an effectiveness and impact, is I talk to the health post worker. I said, have the incidences of diarrhea-related illnesses reduced? Hands down, every community, no. Really? Like, seriously? Like, the lady's like, no, actually, the populations have gotten bigger, the families have gotten bigger, the incident rate has actually gotten higher in some of these communities. That doesn't make any sense at all. Like, these people built a lot of latrines, and they monitored it the entire way. And, like, I've got this map. I see a water system here. Like, I don't, like, why do they still have diarrhea? And I went to the communities, and we started doing focus groups with women, children, and men, and it turned out that for the women, they didn't want to get their water from the water well because a lot of them in these indigenous communities spent time together as women at the water source. So they would walk there together every day, they would collect their water there together every day, and they would talk about really important stuff. And if you started going to the water source, you would be left out of that. And that was a very political decision. And so in that focus group, we found out that the water source, and they were the only ones who collected water, women and children. So, like, that was that. Like, that, they were not interested in that. And then for the men were, for the latrines, they never used the latrines one single time. Like, you could see that. I actually went to one community, opened up a latrine at an elementary school, and it was full of corn. And I was like, oh no, this is the exact opposite. They filled up all the holes in one of the communities so that it was just a shelf. It was just a really dry, safe place to keep food. It was the perfect place. It was small. They couldn't overstore there. It was by the school where they had the feeding program. It was perfect. And they said, culturally we don't like to use latrines. We're not going to do it. Like this. And they said that. And the thing is, nobody ever trained them about why they actually built the latrine. Nobody ever trained them about why they should use the water source. So they had done all the monitoring, but they never actually asked people about what they wanted or how to change. It's a cultural thing, but you don't want everyone to be sick from diarrhea at the same time. So there wasn't enough investigation. So if you have monitoring and evaluation in the project design part where you are right now, it tells the funder in your community that you're really thinking your project through. You're not just going to do something because you think it's right. You're going to do something because of something that you've gathered, information that you've gathered. So that's just an example of how you can be doing monitoring and then you get to the end of it and you still need to be doing the evaluation because just counting in latrines is not enough. So I mean, if you look at it here, you can come to this school and you can be like, well, I don't understand why we have some of the stuff that we have because we don't use it the way that it was intended on using. Sometimes they don't ask faculty members like, do you really need all of this equipment? They just purchase it because other schools have. I don't know. That's what I've noticed here. So this is your project cycle. This is just a really simple. You're in the design project right now, the design phase. Excuse me. And then you'll implement and you'll monitor, how many latrines did you build, and then you'll assess and you'll evaluate at the very end of your project. If you have a 3-year farm cycle, at the end of the farm cycle, you'll say, okay, this is the impact evaluation we're going to do. You'll report, which is really important, and then you'll revise your project to re-implement it and to reapply for funding. So let's say the farm might be a good example. Catherine has been working on the farm for a little over a year. So she's written a proposal, she's done things. You might be actually revising a proposal that she's already written, or writing a proposal on work that's already being done. It's important that you show prospective funders that you've learned from any, not mistakes, but challenges or situations that have come across that you would actually like to, that you now know because of Catherine's work and how you can learn from that. So that's why we have revise, and it's a continuous cycle. The farm could go on forever, right? But it's always going to go through this exact cycle. Just to show you, this is actually the World Bank funding cycle. I'm not actually a really big fan of the World Bank, but that's where a lot of money comes from. So I took out a whole bunch of extra information just to show you that they actually already tell you you're going to be monitoring and they tell you you're going to be evaluating before you even write your project plan. So this is just kind of like on their website. They have information about the kinds of projects that they're willing to fund, the kind of money they give to governments, and what they expect governments to be doing with it. And they tell you right off the bat, you will be implementing and monitoring at the same time. And you will be at the completion, you will evaluate. There's no question about it for these big funders. That's mandatory. And it shouldn't really, that's kind of how it is. Any questions about that? Okay. Yeah.
But I think it's important as you implement that you also monitor just to make sure that if there are any holes, you can fix them as you go along.
Right, and a lot of plans, a lot of really good plans will actually schedule times for, like, for instance, the formative evaluation. So they say, let's say you're doing a 5-year teacher training plan. After the second academic year, you may actually do an evaluation to see how all the monitoring data adds up and do some interviews, and you may find, like, okay, the teachers really love coming to our workshops. They're really getting a lot out of it, but the problem is we're scheduling them during the grading period. So if we moved all of our teacher training to not holidays, don't. That is a mistake, lesson learned, generated new knowledge, do not move it near the holiday. But if you move it to a time where, you know, you go to their local manager of their school and say, this is really important, could you give the teacher 2 days off, you know, and do something else with the kids, or I don't know, something, and give us time to do the training when they're scheduled to be working, or something like that. So it is really important for that. So at the beginning, when you're, right now, what you're doing, you have to determine your scope and purpose. So are you going to do all 5 areas of evaluation? Efficiency, effectiveness, impact, sustainability, and relevance? Are you going to do, are you really going to be able to do all of those? Or are you really just going to do some of it? I mean, when I made my plan last year for development management 2, I remember I was like, oh, of course, I'll do all 5, and blah, blah, blah. And then some Donnie's like, here, my teacher got it. And it's like, you're kidding me, right? How are you going to be able to do all of this stuff? And I was like, oh, I thought you had to do all 5. And he was like, no, be realistic. And you have to be realistic because you have to think about what resources you have. And then determine your scope. Like, how much do you need to know to answer your questions? So, like, how much do you need to know about how much money you spend? How much do you need to know about how many people ate from the farm stand? Like, what is the scope of the work that you need to figure out? This is it. Like, this is basically, yeah.
With these bigger donors like the World Bank, do they give you like a specific plan on how you're going to monitor and evaluation, like the process that you're going to go through, or do you have a little bit of freedom to?
Here is my understanding with, like, USAID is probably a better example because they'll directly fund projects. USAID, what they'll do is they will say, okay, here's what's going to happen. You had your 6-year project. We're going to do a formative evaluation here at the 3-year mark, and then we're going to come back at the 6-year mark, and we're going to do summative evaluation, and then at the 2-year mark, after you're done 2 years later, we're going to do another evaluation to see how, if it's really working. So they'll tell you that's what they're going to do. They're going to hire somebody to come. They're going to hire Jim Levinson to come in and do that for you. And they'll say, but if you want to get the money from the get-go, you need to actually, as part of your project, you need to be monitoring the entire time, and you need to be evaluating the entire time. Because before they hire Jim Levinson to come in, he's going to expect, he's only going to be there for like 2 or 3 weeks at a time. So he's going to expect to have documents from your organization that documents all the work that you've been doing. So, so that's kind of how it is. So when you're planning, some places will, like you're asking, will want a form. They'll want like a specific form, which I just passed out one I think that CARE uses. Yeah, this is from a CARE worksheet. And then they're going to want to know the different levels, the evaluation questions, and they're going to want to know like how you're going to know the answer to these questions. That's your indicator, and then that you know what kind of information is going to answer those questions. So I'll show you examples of that from my work here when we get to that part. This is a really important part of the planning process because this is where you decide, let's say for instance, you are doing HIV/AIDS education. So you want to reduce the amount of transmission of HIV/AIDS in Brattleboro. So you say, what we're going to do is we're going to distribute condoms, and we're going to do workshops for high-risk populations in Brattleboro. So what you do is you say, okay, here's how many condoms we distributed, you know, all this stuff. So the question that we're going to ask is probably going to be, to what extent did our intervention help the target population versus non-target population. So you're going to probably try to find a town that's exactly like Brattleboro, and you're going to compare, you're going to track over time the differences in their HIV transmission rate. Now, we're going to do training for 3 years, and then do you think that the transmission rate reduces in 3 years? No, it doesn't, because you've got maybe 15-year-old you're training, and they could still transmit. They're probably not going to be fully sexually active until they're older. So what you really want to know is over time. So you, as a program, can't really control how many people transmit HIV/AIDS. So you can really only control how you train them. So there's no way to directly impact that. But you do want to see that over time that it reduces. So if it reduces in the place where you are doing the training, and it does not reduce in a place where the training did not exist, you can do a differences of differences analysis, and you can say, there could be some causality to that. But that's getting like really into it. But this is the point where you determine like what kind of baseline information you'll need. So for instance, if you're doing work in Uganda, like what kind of baseline population do you need from your target population and from your control group? And then what are you collecting? So I don't really want to get too into stuff about like control groups and baseline. That's like a lot of really boring and picky information. So once you decide like what you need, is how are you going to collect it? So this is the third step. How are you going to collect it? A lot of the stuff you probably talked about in practitioner inquiry. Yay, practitioner inquiry. So this is the kind of, on a bigger scale, it's kind of the same thing as an inquiry. That's what an evaluation is. So you talked about surveys or questionnaires, which some people use the term interchangeably. Interviews, expert interviews, or just target population interviews. Focus groups. Everyone know those are the 3 things I know in PI that I feel that we all talk about. Observations. So I went and I opened latrine doors, and corn fell out. There is no poop to be found in the latrine. So those are one thing. Literature reviews, mapping. How many of you ever participated in community mapping? Okay, so what kind of stuff did you do?
It was part of an internship with an NGO, and there's a group of us who went around with the village chief, and he showed us, like, this is where people go to the bathroom, this is where people get water, this is where this group of people live.
Right, so a lot of times when you do community mapping, a lot of times what you can do, like when you're in this phase, the design phase, is you'll say, draw a picture of your community now. And then, sometimes like the community of your sueños, the community of your dreams. So when I worked in Central America, we'd say to the teens, like, this is what show me what your community looks like today. And then the next day we go back and like, now we want you to draw what you want your community to look like in 5 years. And then we would do that, and then they would say, okay, it looks like all of you want the community to be cleaner. So why don't we do a project about littering, or something like that. Or it looks like all of you want to have jobs. So why don't we do a project on, economic opportunities. And so that's kind of like community mapping. It's a way to get people's input on what they want their community to look like, or what they think their community looks like. Review available data. This is what I was talking about with you, Billy, with the when an evaluator comes in, they're going to want to get as much of your records as possible that you've been keeping for monitoring and evaluation. And so that's why big funders want you to be doing it yourself, so that when they pay somebody, they don't have to pay somebody for longer than they have to come in and do it. The Delphi technique. Has anyone ever used Delphi technique? I've only used it once, and I was not a participant, and I was really glad. But it's like where you send out information, like a question on writing, everyone writes down their answer, and then someone takes all of it and aggregates it, and then says, okay, from reading this, I am to understand that you all believe this, and then you send it out again, and people correct that statement, or they correct anything that was aggregated, or they respond because you're each individually getting the survey. They respond to what other people say, and it's like, okay, after reading your responses to each other and the statement, I am to believe that you say this, and then you aggregate again, and then usually you tell them we're going to do it in 4 rounds. So if you don't get your response in 4 rounds, like that's it. So you'll find when you do the Delphi technique, though, if you tell them in the front that you're doing 3 rounds, They will all like be really polite in the first round, and then they'll start like jabbing a little to each other. Because it's anonymous, so you don't know who's saying what, and they'll kind of be like, well, participant 2 has forgotten, you know, and then in the third round it's like, well, I think it's completely irresponsible to use money, and it's like, okay, that's not really. But it's a way to get candid responses, and then a citizen report card. I think citizen report card was made up in Bangladesh, where all things come from for development. But Bangladesh, where they just go around and it's just like a little kid's report card, you know, like math, science, whatever. It's like, you know, street tools, like what, you know, and people just grade them. And of course, there's all the subjectivity and stuff, but it's a way to get feedback. So those are some data collection methods. Can you guys think of any other? Okay. So those are really the only ones I could think of when I was making this PowerPoint yesterday. So, and then the last 2 parts when you're planning are probably the 2 most important parts. The fourth one is planning critical reflection processes and events. So you see in this little cartoon right here, you've got the community and they're talking about what they think they need. And then you've got the council members who are up here talking about what they think they need. And this lady's saying, oh, my uncle's in the business of like building roads. So like, and you know, it's not always that corrupt, but sometimes there's always people who have agendas. So it's about participate. I mean, this is obviously my own thing, but like, it's about getting everybody involved in the reflection process. So in the beginning, you want to say like, we're going to involve our stakeholders in designing the monitoring and evaluation plan, and then you want to plan different points where it makes sense to involve them in monitoring and involve them in evaluating, because they're the only ones who can really tell you if they know how to use a condom or not. So that's one thing. And the last thing is plan for reporting. How are you going to tell your stakeholders that we were successful? Not just that you were successful, but the whole community. Like, how are we going to tell them that this is successful? So have any of you ever like read a report about something like this? For all of you who are, you know, U.S. citizens, we're supposed to get that from our media, but the media might not be the best place to get it. But we have a Department of Government Oversight. My friend works there, one of my nerdy monitoring and evaluation friends, and he actually does this exact thing for government initiatives. And you can always go online and find out how effective the different initiatives that we have been. We do it a lot for schools. That's where you hear the most. That's where you hear the most about schools really get ragged on, because it's really, really easy to collect data in schools about students. You know, you know exactly how many. You can track them very easily. So. You just write a report, you send it to your funder, you send it to your people that you worked with. If you were the Red Cross and you were distributing condoms, you may send it to, you know, the YWCA where you distributed the condoms. You may send it to the Ministry of Health, you know, whoever else. But that's not really who's important. Like, who's actually important is the people that you're helping. So when you're planning for reporting, oftentimes you need to plan 2 different types of reporting. One for different group, different stakeholders had different reporting. I've seen plays, communities that where the program managers have put on plays for the children, you know, to explain, like, we did a hand washing thing with kids about, you know, to wash their hands, and we did a play in the beginning about the problem, and then we did a hand washing intervention for 6 months, and then we had the kids do a play at the end about like why they like to wash their hands, and then we told them like how things had gotten better because they've been washing their hands. And had there been electricity in that village, we would have videotaped it. But AnnaLiza did not charge battery to that camera, so it was not recorded. And so there's different types of way of reporting. It's like my favorite part. It's my favorite part of evaluation is like telling the most important stakeholders, you know, if we've actually been helpful to them or not, and how we plan to be more helpful in the future. So that's all part of your plan. So, like I said, I gave you this chart. This is I see this like all the time in project proposals, a chart like this. Sometimes they prefer narratives. Sometimes they just want a Gantt chart that's like, we're going to monitor this, this, and this. This is where we're going to do it. This is who's going to do it. It's usually 2 pages max for all of this information. Like, I've never seen in a proposal more than 2 or 3 pages for a monitoring and evaluation plan. That is like a lot of information in the front. They want to know more about other stuff. They're not that worried about this at this point. They're not going to worry about this until it's like 5 years later and they want to know where your money went. So you you actually have to do this process twice. You have to vet your monitoring evaluation twice. So you do this once when you actually write your proposal, and then when you get your money, yay, everybody got funded, fully funded, with no considerations to be made. You know, you get your money, then you actually have to write a real plan, and that's a totally different thing that involves big, giant. That's what I do here. Is I like write an actual plan where it's very detailed. It has action plans. It has work plans. Lots of detail, and it has terms of reference and things like that. So that you have to do this twice. Once very kind of scantily for your proposal, but give it some thought, because if you put it in your proposal and then you don't do it, that also implies how you manage, and they may not like you as a manager because of that. Typically, we like to say that you should 7 to 10% of your funding should go to monitoring and evaluation for your budget. That's a lot of your budget, but if you think of it, if you're going to be having, most people only do 5 to 6%. I'll be really honest, but if you're going to use your own staff to do monitoring and your own staff to do midpoint evaluations, if you're going to ask stakeholders to come in and do community mapping, if you're going to ask people to do all these things with you, you need to plan it into your budget. Like transportation, venue rentals, you're going to be paying your staff members, and you don't want to take that out of your program staff time. Like, so you're gonna have program staff salaries, and then you're gonna have like an extra salary for when they do monitoring and evaluation work. You don't want that to come out of the same part of your budget, because it could take them time. You want it to be separate. You want it to be important. You want it to look important on your budget line. You want it to look important to your funder. You want it to look important to your stakeholders, because it is. So it's important. That's kind of like one of the technical things. So this is what I do here. We have 4 areas. We don't do all 5, or I've decided that I'm not capable of doing all 5. The way the school is set up, we're under a big umbrella called S.I.T, but we're the Graduate Institute. So starting from the bottom, we kind of want to know how relevant and effective the degrees are that we offer. So these are all the degrees, not including certificates that S.I.T offers. So this is the Oman project, this is the summer MAT project, and the academic year MAT project. And then these are all of our degrees, for PIM degrees that we're more familiar with. So on the degree level, we want to know, is the degree relevant? Like if you come here and you learn about conflict transformation, are you actually learning about things that conflict transformation practitioners need to know about? Like, do we know if it's relevant? And then, do we know if it's effective? So if you come here and you learn about IE, are we effectively teaching you IE stuff? Not just like, are we teaching you the right stuff, because that's the relevancy piece. Are we actually effectively doing our 9 months on campus and our off-campus phase? So those are the 2 questions we ask on the degree level. Then we move up to the actual PIM, MAT, and Oman level, and we're asking, are these programs that we're running under these programs, are they having the impact that we want? PIM has a mission, MAT has a mission, Oman has a mission, which is actually really similar to PIM's, but they have their own missions, and are they actually meeting the impact? Do we have the development and practitioners? Do we have culturally sensitive and aware people that we wanted to send out to the world? Do they exist? So we do that. We have ways to measure our impact, and then up here, it is sustainable for the Graduate Institute to continue to run these programs. So that's kind of how which one did I leave off? Which of the 5 did I not put in there? And why? Why do you think I left it off?
Efficiency?
Yeah, efficiency. Because even if we go through, like, let's say, Rich and the IE people go through and they do a really good job, and they do this and an efficiency in the degree area. They actually don't have that much control over their resources. And even on the PIM level with the deans, like, they don't actually have that much control over their resources. And even here, we have control, but it's not the way that you as a program manager on the farm have control. So it could just be frustrating to send the faculty jumping through all of these hoops, when in the end, when we say, like, oh, you've been very, very efficient, but we're still going to spend the money completely differently than what you all think we should do. Like, that doesn't make sense to do that to your stakeholders or to the students. Like, that would be brutal. Don't do that to people. If they can't impact your decision making, then don't follow them. This is, you don't have to like really read this whole thing. I just wanted to show you how I filled out this one chart. For the conflict transformation degree program, the first question we're asking is it relevant? We will know it's relevant if people, one way we will know if people continue to, the way you write, this is an example of how to write an indicator. The number of students between 2010 and 2014 who enrolled in the CT program. And so we have a target of 95 students. We average about 12 to 18 students in the program a year. We're hoping to like make the program relevant. Another indicator of is it relevant is of the students who have enrolled and completed the practicum phase since 2010, the percentage using degree competencies during their practicum phase. So CT students have competencies about mediation, facilitation. They have competencies about using frameworks to break down conflicts. So we're going to send this alumni survey, because that's what we're hoping to get this out to all these people who are CT students. And they're going to tell you, like, no, actually, we don't use any of that. Like, we needed more of this. Or we use that every single day. We wish we would have learned more of the stuff. And then down here, we have by 2014, the percentage of CT alum working professionally in CT-related positions. So they came here, they loved the degree, they loved everything they learned, they wanted to be CT, they wanted to use CT skills in their profession, and they could not get a job. They could not find a job to save their lives in the CT field. Like, that's just like a worst case scenario. So we'll go and we'll say how many people use the competencies in their daily work. They may be a teacher in Brooklyn, like my sister, and they may use conflict transformation skills every single day. But they're a teacher, but they consider that successful still because she's still using her degree in some way. Try to go in and make sense of something that these people have just been doing because they've been here for so long and they do a good job. They don't even know it. They don't even know how they can improve. So it was really challenging when I first got here. I spent most of my time just kind of hanging out with the faculty and trying to figure out what they thought they did, what they did do, and how to put that in an evaluation plan. So that's part of the reason why it's so important to put it in your proposal, because it's been very, very challenging for me to, on the back end of it, to go in and not fix this, but to plan something for the 2012 NEAS review. Like that is one part of my job, is to plan something for the 2012 NEAS review. From the challenges that I had, I said, well, we have to plan something for the future. After 2012, you guys just can't keep doing this every 10 years. This is terrible. like this isn't going to work. And that's how we came up with that big, detailed plan of the degree reviews and things like that. Because you can't just keep, it doesn't make any sense. You know it's a problem. You should try to fix it. Yeah.
What have you learned in terms of working with people who started programs and they're running them, and kind of maybe the difficulties around monitoring and evaluating those programs with them as a stakeholder?
So it kind of depends on your relationship. If the staff is doing the monitoring and evaluation and they believe in it, and you write it into their job descriptions as a value and not like as an accountability thing, it's often like very positive. They're often willing to change things. But if it becomes in like I'm checking on you, it can be very not adversarial, but there's a lot of tension between monitoring and evaluation. There's usually not that much tension between monitoring. Like if you either did the training or you didn't. You either ordered the textbooks or you didn't. You either distributed the condoms or you didn't. Like that's that. Like there's no way anyone can argue with that. But it's with the actual evaluation component where they receive the feedback and you are trying to like. If you're at a midpoint and you're saying, well, it's really, you've been doing a really good job, I think this is really good, but here's one thing, and this is their life's work. That is really challenging, like trying to get feedback to, It was kind of like when I was in OB1 and I had been doing all this consulting for so long, and then we were learning about the feedback session. It was like watching a movie of my life go by. When they were talking about like all the bad things that happen when you give feedback. I was like, oh, I have seen that happen. Like that is a real scenario. That is not made up. Claire Halverson, when she wrote this book, she was actually talking about something that happened to me once. So yeah, that's probably the most challenging thing, is getting people to buy into it. But once you have buy-in and you explain like how it's not meant to be intimidating, it's not meant to judge people. It's meant to judge the work, like the outcome. They can be more positive. But yeah.
First, I want to thank you. You have a lot of information. Really good and refreshing. But I wanted to ask a question from the beginning phases of implementation phase. It's like you said the project that went through and then culturally it wasn't accepted in that community, how can you avoid that mistake, like training on this and then after it's all done and paid for, then it's not even going to be useful for the people?
That really goes into your needs assessment. And it goes into the needs assessment portion of your program. A lot of times you can find, this was really true for water and sanitation projects I found when I was working, that were really, really successful in Central America and very unsuccessful in Asia for cultural reasons. Really, really successful in Africa and really unsuccessful in Asia, or really successful in Asia, vice versa, just because of cultural reasons. So if you do a proper needs assessment, you'll find that sometimes the technology that works really well in North America is not going to work really well in Sub-Saharan Africa, not just for cultural reasons, but for environmental reasons. And those people know better than anybody else, like what's going to work in their communities. Like without a doubt, hands down, indigenous Maya people and beliefs know better what's going to work for them than what an outside program knows. So it's just really important that you believe that, like that you really, really believe that. Even though you have seen amazing things happen here in North America with that same exact technology, you have to know that they know better what's going to work in their community than you do. You have to know that. Like I've seen a community, an indigenous community in Guatemala. They built a school on the Belize border for the students, and the whole entire community left. They just moved their entire village down the river. They didn't listen to a single thing we asked for. So. And they weren't being greedy or anything. They just said they didn't want school. They don't like concrete buildings. That was the gist of it. The concrete buildings are not good for their communities.
Right.
So I was going to ask, as a follow-up, would you think it's better to have someone from that community to help you with the needs assessment, or is it better if you go in as a stranger?
You don't ever want to go in as a total stranger. I mean, you can, but if you have good facilitation skills and good cross-cultural skills, you can always be a participant. You have to know there's a difference between being a facilitator and a moderator and then being a stakeholder. So, like, if you're a facilitator, you can definitely help them make decisions for themselves. You can facilitate that process so that you try to help as much as you can equalize any power dynamics or any community issues. But you, at the end of the day, when this program is over, you leave. Like, they live there. So it's just really important that, and the other thing is everybody in the community has their own agenda. So when you're doing a needs assessment, like, you really have to know that you need to get everybody's feedback. So as a facilitator, that might be easier for you. But as an outsider, you need to always remember that at the end of the day, you leave that community, you're not going to live there for the rest of your life. 10 generations of your family won't be there when you're gone. Their families will be. And that's, like, the most important thing.
Without a baseline or control group, what obstacles do you face doing this?
I've had that exact situation happen before. Here it's not that hard. We're working out of school because they have enrollment data, they have grades, they have pass-fail. I mean, IE has years of student work collected, so does development management. A lot of the stuff gets digitally archived. So in schools, even if they didn't know they were collecting it, they're collecting data. And that's true. But I actually worked for a project and I came in and they wanted me to do an evaluation at the end, and the problem was they didn't really have a very good project hierarchy set up. They didn't have a log frame like really ironed out. And I know like everyone's like, oh, log frames are terrible. But because they didn't say like what exactly they wanted to achieve, it was hard to tell them if they had been successful or not. So, I mean, sometimes just stating in the beginning, there are 300 teachers in Toledo district. We want to train 150 of them in this. We want to train 250 of them in this. We want to train all 300 of them in this. I can't know if they did what they were supposed to do. So that was one thing. Like, if they don't set their goals properly, it's really hard to. But if you don't have a baseline and a control group when you do evaluations, a lot of really big sticklers for statistics and evaluation will not consider it a credible evaluation, and it will be considered an assessment instead. So that is why...
And the difference between the two,
right?
Is?
There is a difference between an audit, an assessment, and an evaluation. Evaluation is kind of the big goal, but an evaluation is where you're comparing. Like, there's a comparative nature in evaluation. So here at the graduate school, we technically do assessment, because we really only assess ourselves. We are able to do that credibly because we have standards that we set for ourselves. We have these degree competencies, we have program competencies, you know, the MAP program has the state certificate they're applying for. So there are these standards that we're subscribed to. NEASC has standards that we're meeting. So for us, are we meeting the standards or are we not? But for if you're doing a project in a community where there are no set standards, it's a completely different project, you need to have a control group. You need to know that at the beginning. You need to have that, and you need to collect a proper baseline. There are a million different ways to collect baseline. There are a million different ways to set up those quasi-experimental designs, experimental. Did you guys talk about that in PI at all? I don't know. A lot of that stuff I learned before I came. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff like that. And if you ever get into that, there are a lot of resources in the library. And also, like, I'd be happy. Jim Levinson is very helpful in that if you're taking this PI class. I imagine that he'll talk about that again. Any other questions?
What are among the most important things you've heard from us? I mean, yourself. What settled in? What first comes to mind? What's some of the most important information that you heard here, just in a sound bite? Again, it's your story, right? So, yeah.
Careful planning.
Careful planning is what you heard. Okay, around that.
People's participation and teaching people to monitor and evaluate themselves.
I think articulating it in a proposal through a graph or a narrative, like a quick snapshot.
Courtney?
I like the idea of thinking about monitoring evaluation sort of like from the very beginning. You should be thinking about it throughout your entire design. And you should be doing it sort of too, even if you're not required to. You should be doing it yourself.
And what would you first be thinking about then in thinking about that? Yeah.
What type of evaluation is to be done based on the audience?
What type of evaluation to be done? What else?
I mean, it was official check-in points,
Official check-in points on?
on your data, like basically your assessments or not evaluations, assessments or the other word.
Okay. How you know you're in the right place? How will you know you're in the right place?
How do you know you got where you're going?
Billy, how about you? What's the most important thing? Oh, you said people. Yeah,
I'm just thinking, because you say evaluation is comparing, I'm just thinking about our project. If we did an evaluation, we did an assessment, I'm not sure.
Say again?
Like for our project, I was just thinking like, Lisa mentioned that evaluation is a comparison. So I was just thinking about our project, how will we approach that? Is it an evaluation? Are we assessing like how?
What is, for me, the first thing that comes to mind is, what am I going to measure? What am I going to measure? What am I going to measure? Right? That's what you're saying. Okay, comparative is kind of, okay, well, how can I measure better? That's, what am I going to measure? And then secondly, how am I going to measure it? What are the indicators? And that's where you get into these kind of different layers that become pretty complicated pretty quick. You need to think, I think very quickly, looking at your log frame, you've already done it actually. Your log frame is telling you more about what you want to measure, what you want to look at. What are going to be, my question handed to you was, how do you know you're in the right spot? Well, haven't we found the right indicators? I mean, we count toilets, sort of thing around it. It's both very, very, very complex, but it's also very, very simple in one sense if you're clear-headed and work through the little chain that you've got, your goal, objective, and so forth. So you work through it.
I want to emphasize that not all people are able to have control groups. That doesn't always make sense. So like in this farm situation, that might not make sense. So you would be a quasi-experimental design. So it would be a baseline. You would have I don't know what exactly, but if you're trying to change people's attitudes about eating locally, maybe, I don't know. And so you would have to do a baseline on people's attitudes about that, you know, random sample of S.I.T. students or random sample of people who purchase foods for big suppliers or whatever. and then, 4 years down the line, you would do a random sample of the same population, and to see if their attitudinally they have changed, or if their knowledge has changed, or do they feel like the food is more available to them now, stuff like that. So it is not feasible for most people to do a comparative group.
Yeah.
Really, only in situations like with education and quasi feasibility, like it's not feasible. So most of you probably will do what they call quasi-experimental designs. And it's quasi because cannot be considered a true experiment if it doesn't have a control. And people always ask me why I like doing this, and I say that because I started out as a teacher, I probably kind of already have this natural tendency to assess things. Like when you're a teacher, they're always pushing that, especially because I was educated during the No Child Left Behind era. So when I was going through teacher education school, that was really a big deal when I was in education college. But also, this is really interesting, like capturing and measuring social change is kind of what monitoring and evaluation is. And most of us don't really think, a lot of people don't think of it that way, but those of us who do it really do think of it that way. You take something that seems so unmeasurable and so big and complicated, and you say, no, it's just this. And you can just see it through this, and it's a way not to quantify things, but a way to see how progress is made. And it's really interesting. Not everybody enjoys it, but I really enjoyed it. Yeah.
Well, and just to add to that, when I was working for a small NGO at the UN, I felt really uncomfortable through this whole M&E process because they would choose the organization, and I think most advocacy organizations would choose, like, say, a resolution passed by the General Assembly and count that as, like, this is the outcome of all of the work that we've done.
Right.
But how do you actually know that those diplomats voted a certain way because of your,
right.
Because of the meetings you held, or you never really know in terms of, like, when you do advocacy and you're working directly with policymakers. I think it just makes me feel so uncomfortable. I don't know if you could speak to that, or.
Yeah, that's a big, we talk about that all, that's something that we learn about all the time, and we're constantly trying to find better ways to measure the goal. So like usually, like in some of these, when you look at the goal is something that's really lofty, like Teach for America, or eradicate educational inequity, poverty, done with it, no more of that. Like malnutrition, out of here, we're done. Like that's gigantic. Like so I can say, okay, I distributed infant formula to all of these parents and all these mothers and whatever, and that was my purpose, and I can measure these things really easily. But then like, what if the Ministry of Health, completely separately from me, went around and just like hand fed every single baby in Ecuador that year? Like, so I can sit there and say, yes, malnutrition eradicated, no like malnourished babies this year. But, like that wasn't me, like you don't know. So it's the idea, and like strategically, like logically, and that's why it's called the logic framework, logically linking every input to every activity, to every output, to every purpose. If all of those logically make sense, then one could say you have contributed to your goal, but you can never truly measure your goal. So that's why some people say just stop at effectiveness. Like, why are we even going to pay for an impact survey? Like, how do we even know if we have reduced HIV/AIDS transmission in Brattleboro? That could have just been some like really hip high school teacher passing out condoms in the boys' bathroom. Like, who knows? Like, you don't know that. Like, you can't control all these things. So if you have logically and if this makes sense in your logical framework, so that if this is true, like if this, then this will happen. If this happens, then this can happen. If this can happen, then this can happen. And if you can say that about your log frame, then you can kind of say you have contributed to your overall goal. But it's very, very difficult to statistically, analytically say you have eradicated poverty in Ecuador. That would just be that would be really hard. And I know that policy advocacy is one of the hardest. Policy in general is one of the hardest things to monitor and evaluate.
Kind of on that note, during the DC trip, CARE is actually one of the leading organizations that have just invented this way to monitor policy. It's
super interesting.
CARE is one of the leaders.
Yeah.
And, a lot of this is a handout from, you can see from CARE, a CARE workbook they put out like in the late 90s. But CARE is a big one. IFAD, which is the International Fund for Agricultural Development, they're really big. And they all have their resources online. They all put them online.
Yeah, you can get right to all this information.
exactly.
In fact, some of it's in your recommended readings. You can land there and find those that are useful. That's the first thing. If you want to find those things that you can make sense out of and use. Other
Rural
ones that don't, there are others that,
development.
yeah.
So this comparison sheet is on CARE's website somewhere?
Probably. I actually photocopied. I mean, I received this in a class, but also I have the CARE handbook that it came in. But you know, at this point in time, I think like almost all of CARE, Peace Corps, USAID have almost all of their stuff on PDF online.
Mm-hmm.
But you would have to like go through the PDF and try to find this.
Do you have a copy that you could put on WordPress?
I only have hard copies of this, so I don't know.
We'll have to track it down.
You know, I can maybe look for it or something, but. Oh, I have it in a PowerPoint too. I received from Sondani for CARE, so maybe if I can put a PowerPoint on here.
If you could put this PowerPoint on Google,
Yeah.
then that would be
Oh,
Okay.
yeah, that would be great.
Yeah, I will send that to your TA. Jess, right?
Yeah. No, I'll deal with it.
Okay. So you do
Used to
you
be
do your
my
own
guy
stuff?
then.
You want
Yeah,
to
yeah,
faculty?
yeah.
Look at
I knew me. That's how I do it.
you. Okay, so any other questions?
I just wanted a resource list, and maybe that could just be us talking, but if you had a list, maybe putting that in the middle, or?
Okay, yeah. There are a lot of monitoring there are monitoring and evaluation networks, and there's a standards commission that makes standards for all evaluators that they have to follow, so that's ethical and stuff like that, you know, all that stuff, all that jazz. So I can make sure that link is on there as well.
So what are your plans after you're done?
Well, I just want a job. I just want a job. That's basically anything. I'm hoping to find a monitoring and evaluation job. Those are all often consultancies, and I'm kind of uncomfortable working as a consultant. That's like kind of a weird position in development. So I'd like to actually work for like, you know, the Rural Development Institute, or like work for a group and help them do their internal evaluation versus being an external. So that's kind of hard, you know. I'm trying to, you know, everybody gets funding from the same places. We all know like the terrible cycle of funding and all that stuff. So right now is the time when everyone's able to post jobs. So I'm able to look and see, but you know, once that funding cycle is closed and everybody gets funded, then later in the year, you know, it's just consultancies. So I'm hoping to jump on something now. But doing monitoring and evaluation, maybe in poverty reduction, or I'm particularly interested in like women in development, gender and development.
The class that Aaron was talking about with DC, the woman from CARE said that doing monitoring and evaluation within advocacy was like a growing thing.
It is not very many people want to do this. I'll be honest.
Right.
Within advocacy specifically, though.
Right.
It's like grant writing. There's jobs there, development work, there's jobs there, and M&E, there's jobs there. So some of the skill sets are there.
Actually,
For real
one of the faculty members who works here, the headquarters for CARE is in Atlanta, where my family's from, and she used to be, I think, the SD chair here. So maybe I'll try to get in contact with her. Although she wasn't here while I was here, I might
Malia.
try to network to that somehow. I remember before. So yeah, so hopefully, cross your fingers for me. I get a job doing something.
Well, thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.
That's wonderful.